December 21, 1944. The outskirts of Bastogne, Belgium. Dawn breaks over the snow-laden Ardennes forest, where the wind slices through the white silence like a blade. Oberleutnant Karl Hoffmann of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division lowers his field glasses, his breath crystallizing in the frigid air. Before him lies a pocket of American resistance. Exhausted paratroopers dug into frozen trenches, their tanks half buried under snowdrifts. Hoffmann chuckles to his adjutant. "They'll freeze before they surrender." Around him, the men of his platoon share the laughter, their confidence rising with each new artillery shell that crashes into the valley below. To them, Bastogne is already finished. Just another small town swallowed by Hitler's grand counteroffensive. What Hoffmann doesn't see, buried beneath the snow and distance, is the spark of movement far to the south. A relentless army pivoting north with mechanical precision and unstoppable intent. Before we continue with this remarkable story, if you're fascinated by untold military history and engineering marvels, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below telling us which WW2 story you'd like to hear next. Now back to the snowbound siege outside Bastogne. The town of Bastogne, a modest crossroads in southeastern Belgium, had become a vital prize in December 1944. 7 major roads converged there, making it the nerve center for movement across the Ardennes. When the German 5th Panzer Army reached its outskirts, they found it defended not by a full corps, but by the 101st Airborne Division, paratroopers originally meant for rest after months of fighting in Holland. Alongside them were fragments of armor, artillery, and engineers hastily assembled into a defensive ring. Cut off from supplies and surrounded by more than 50,000 German troops, fewer than 12,000 Americans held the perimeter. The Ardennes winter was one of the harshest on record. Temperatures dropped below 20 degrees C. Snow piled waist-high in the forests, and visibility often fell to near zero. The men of the 101st Airborne lacked proper winter clothing. Many wrapped sandbags or burlap around their boots to fight frostbite. Ammunition was rationed, food was scarce, and medical supplies nearly gone. Inside Bastogne, the wounded filled every cellar. Jeep engines were kept running to prevent them from freezing solid. At night, the glow of burning fuel drums offered the only warmth against the darkness of the siege. On the German side, morale was soaring. The Wacht am Rhein offensive, Hitler's final gamble, seemed to be succeeding. After months of retreat, the Wehrmacht had regained momentum, punching a massive wedge into the Allied line. Reports from the front promised swift victory. General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army had bypassed American strongpoints, while elite SS units under Sepp Dietrich's 6th Panzer Army stormed toward Antwerp. For many German soldiers, the Ardennes counterattack was a chance to erase the humiliation of Normandy. Hoffmann's unit, part of General Heinz Kochot's 26th Volksgrenadier Division, occupied the southeastern arc around Bastogne. From their icy foxholes, they could see American flares rising over the town and hear the dull rumble of artillery. The Germans taunted their enemies through loudspeakers, broadcasting demands to surrender. Few in the ranks doubted that the town would fall within days. To them, the defenders' position was untenable, encircled, undersupplied, and isolated. Inside Bastogne, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st, knew the situation was dire but refused despair. The men had dug in along a 25-kilometer defensive line, each sector held by companies whose numbers had dwindled to half strength. Artillerymen fired shells salvaged from abandoned depots, and medics improvised bandages from curtains and torn shirts. The division's radio operators struggled to maintain contact with higher command through interference and snow. When messages did come through, they carried one consistent order: hold at all costs. American intelligence at Supreme Headquarters. Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAF, was already in motion. Reports from reconnaissance flights and field intercepts painted a grim picture, a massive German offensive cutting deep into Belgium. Yet, in the chaos, one man saw an opportunity. In the small town of Luxembourg, General George S. Patton, commanding the U.S. Third Army, had been waiting for exactly this kind of challenge. 3 days earlier, during a staff meeting, Patton had ordered his operations officers to draft 3 contingency plans for a rapid change of front, north, east, or west, within 48 hours. His staff, led by Major General Hugh Gaffey, had already prepared movement orders for entire corps. When news arrived that Bastogne was encircled, Patton didn't hesitate. "We're going to Bastogne," he said, striking the map with his riding crop. It was an audacious decision, a 90-degree pivot of an entire field army across frozen terrain and clogged roads in the middle of winter. Meanwhile, Hoffman's optimism grew with every passing hour. He watched German supply convoys crawling through the snow, bringing ammunition and field kitchens closer to the front. Officers briefed their men that Bastogne would fall before Christmas. Among the soldiers, talk turned to returning home once Antwerp was captured. The laughter came easily then, muffled only by the distant sound of American artillery that refused to go silent. As dusk settled, the forest flickered with the ghostly light of muzzle flashes. The Americans held, their thin lines bending but not breaking. In one sector, paratroopers repelled an assault by the German 901st Regiment using little more than grenades and bazookas. "They fight like madmen," one captured German corporal muttered. Still, Hoffman and his comrades dismissed it as desperation. They believed hunger and cold would finish the job. That night, as the snow thickened and the temperature plunged even lower, the 101st Airborne waited in their foxholes. Somewhere far to the south, engines roared to life, hundreds of Shermans, half-tracks, and supply trucks grinding forward through the blizzard. Columns of the U.S. Third Army, stretching for miles, began their turn north. Patton's gamble had begun. In the frozen stillness outside Bastogne, Oberleutnant Karl Hoffmann watched the faint glow on the horizon and smiled. "It's over for them," he said quietly. What he didn't know was that the very sound he dismissed as distant thunder was, in truth, the first rumble of salvation. Within 48 hours, the laughter in the snow would fade into disbelief. The Ardennes offensive, known to the Germans as Unternehmen Wacht am Rhein, Operation Watch on the Rhine, was born from desperation cloaked in ambition. In October 1944, as Allied forces pressed toward the Rhine River, Adolf Hitler conceived a counterstroke that he believed could reverse Germany's fortunes. The plan called for a massive surprise attack through the Ardennes forest, the same region German armor had swept through in 1940. The objective was audacious: drive through thinly held American lines, cross the Meuse River, and seize the port of Antwerp. By splitting the Allied armies, Hitler hoped to trap the British in the north, forcing the Western Allies into a negotiated peace and allowing Germany to concentrate against the Soviet Union. The planning began in secrecy within Hitler's headquarters, at the Adlerhorst compound near Gießen. The Führer's generals were divided. Many, including Rundstedt and Model, warned that Germany no longer possessed the resources for such an offensive. The Wehrmacht was exhausted, short on fuel, and fighting on 3 fronts. Yet Hitler ignored their cautions. He envisioned a bold strike, 2 panzer armies leading the assault, with infantry divisions following to secure the gains. In total, the offensive would involve more than 200,000 men, nearly 1,000 tanks and assault guns, and 2,000 artillery pieces. For comparison, it was Germany's largest operation on the Western Front since 1940. The chosen area, the Ardennes, seemed ideal for surprise. Allied planners considered the forested region unsuitable for large-scale operations, believing its terrain and narrow roads made major offensives impossible. Thinly defended by understrength American divisions recovering from previous campaigns, it presented an inviting target. The Germans hoped to exploit this weakness under the cover of bad weather, which would ground Allied aircraft and mask their movements. On December 16, 1944, the assault began. At 05:30, German artillery opened fire along an 80-mile front from Monschau in the north to Echternach in the south. The bombardment shattered the quiet of the winter forest. Within hours, armored columns from the 5th and 6th Panzer armies broke through the thin American lines. Villages such as Clairvaux and Saint-Vith were engulfed in fire and chaos. American units fought stubbornly but were quickly outflanked. For a few days, it seemed as if the German dream of splitting the Allied armies was possible. As the front buckled, Eisenhower's headquarters at Chef scrambled to respond. Communications were fragmented. Weather conditions grounded reconnaissance flights, leaving commanders uncertain of the full scale of the attack. Eisenhower realized that immediate reinforcement was essential. To the north, Montgomery's 21st Army Group prepared to defend the Meuse. To the south, in Lorraine, General George S. Patton was ordered to halt his offensive toward the Saar and pivot north to relieve the besieged forces around Bastogne. Patton's Third Army was already one of the most formidable formations in the Allied arsenal, comprising roughly 250,000 men organized into 3 corps. It included the 4th Armored Division, the 80th and 26th Infantry Divisions, and powerful artillery and support elements. Its supply network, fed by the Red Ball Express, moved thousands of tons of fuel, ammunition, and food daily across France. Unlike the German army, which relied on horse-drawn wagons and dwindling fuel reserves, Patton's forces were fully motorized. Each division could relocate in hours rather than days. Patton's command style was unorthodox, but ruthlessly effective. He demanded absolute speed, precision, and discipline. His headquarters operated like a machine, with clear communication lines and detailed contingency planning. Long before the German attack, Patton had predicted a counteroffensive somewhere in the Ardennes. During a conference with Eisenhower at Verdun on December 19th, he shocked the room by announcing he could redirect his entire army north within 48 hours. His staff had already mapped potential routes, identified fuel depots, and calculated bridge capacities. When Eisenhower asked how soon he could move, Patton's answer was immediate. "I can attack with 3 divisions in 48 hours. This claim was not bluster. The logistical system supporting the Third Army was a marvel of wartime organization. The Red Ball Express, a fleet of nearly 6,000 trucks driven primarily by African-American soldiers, kept a continuous flow of supplies from Normandy to the front. In December, despite snow and frozen roads, the system still delivered more than 10,000 tons of supplies per day. Fuel depots were positioned with redundancy, allowing Patton's forces to refuel rapidly even during movement. Maintenance units worked around the clock to ensure tanks and vehicles remained operational in sub-zero temperatures. In contrast, the German offensive was crippled by shortages from its inception. Fuel reserves were insufficient for sustained operations. Many panzers carried only enough fuel for 2 days of combat. Supply convoys struggled through snow-clogged roads, and Allied air attacks, once the skies cleared, would devastate what little logistics Germany possessed. Even in the first days of Wacht am Rhein, commanders like Manteuffel and Piper reported fuel delays and bottlenecks. The entire offensive depended on capturing Allied fuel dumps. While the Germans advanced westward, the situation in Bastogne deteriorated. The town, surrounded by 7 converging roads, became the focal point of the battle. By December 20th, the 101st Airborne and attached units were completely encircled. Communications with higher command were limited, and supplies ran dangerously low. Still, the defenders refused to surrender. McAuliffe and his officers organized a tight perimeter defense, supported by sporadic artillery and the courage of infantrymen who fought from snow-covered foxholes against tanks and overwhelming firepower. At Schaeff headquarters, Eisenhower made the decision that would define the campaign. Patton's Third Army would attack north immediately to relieve Bastogne. The plan called for an unprecedented 90-degree pivot. Armored columns would disengage from combat in Lorraine, wheel north across Luxembourg, and strike through Neufchâteau and Arlon toward the encircled town. Military analysts deemed it impossible under such conditions. Snow, ice, and narrow roads would make movement agonizingly slow. But Patton's headquarters had already prepared the necessary movement orders. His G4 logistics officers coordinated fuel and ammunition convoys, while engineers readied bridges and cleared routes through the snow. By December 21st, as German forces tightened their grip around Bastogne, Patton's orders radiated outward across the Third Army's network. Tank crews, mechanics, and drivers worked through the night to prepare their vehicles. Convoys stretched for miles across the frozen countryside. Soldiers received orders to move at first light. Patton's gamble would test not only the endurance of his men, but the very limits of Allied mobility. The German command remained oblivious to the scale of the movement. Intelligence officers believed the Americans lacked the fuel and coordination to mount a counterattack in such weather. Reports dismissed the possibility of a large-scale northern maneuver, assuming that Patton's army was still locked in the Saar offensive. This miscalculation would soon cost them dearly. By dawn on December 22nd, snow clouds hung heavy over the Ardennes, muffling sound and concealing movement. Beneath that white silence, an entire army was on the march. Patton's tanks, trucks, and artillery rumbled northward in perfect synchronization, their headlights dimmed against the snow. What had begun as a desperate German gamble was about to collide with the most flexible and determined force the Allies had ever fielded. The transformation of the battlefield had begun. Within 24 hours, Bastogne's fate, and with it, the future of the Ardennes offensive, would hinge on whether Patton's audacious plan could beat the clock and the stormed December 22, 1944, the siege of Bastogne tightened under a sky swollen with snow. The roads leading into the town were clogged with wreckage, burned-out half-tracks, shattered jeeps, and frozen bodies half buried in drifts. Inside the besieged perimeter, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne Division, faced an ultimatum. German envoys, escorted under a white flag, had delivered a written demand for unconditional surrender from General Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz of the Elfsfelden Panzer Corps. It was a neatly typed letter, formal and confident, promising annihilation should the Americans refuse. McAuliffe read it, paused, then smiled faintly. "Aw, nuts," he muttered, tossing the paper onto his desk. The phrase became his official reply. When the German officers returned for an answer, Colonel Joseph Harper, the interpreter, presented McAuliffe's single-word response. Confused, the Germans asked for clarification. Harper explained, "It means, go to hell." The message spread through the American lines within hours. Exhausted men huddled in frozen foxholes repeated the word to one another, laughing in defiance. "Nuts!" became the cry of resistance, a statement that they would hold Bastogne no matter what. While the defenders dug in, an entirely different movement was unfolding 100 miles to the south. Patton's Third Army had begun its historic pivot northward. At dawn on December 22nd, columns of the 4th Armored Division, supported by the 26th Infantry and 80th Infantry Divisions, rolled out of their assembly areas in Lorraine. Engines growled against the cold, tracks ground through the ice, and convoys of fuel trucks followed close behind. The weather was still bitter, snow mixed with freezing rain, but discipline and preparation held the column together. Patton himself rode in his command car, urging his men to move faster despite the conditions. His order was clear: reach Bastogne in 48 hours. The task seemed impossible. The roads through Luxembourg were narrow and twisting, often reduced to single lanes by snowdrifts. Bridges had to be reinforced for the weight of Shermans and tank destroyers. Yet the Third Army moved with precision. Major General Hugh Gaffey, commanding the 4th Armored Division, coordinated the spearhead through Neuchâtel. Combat Command Reserve under Colonel Wendell Blanchard advanced toward Martelange, while Combat Command B under Colonel Bruce Clark took the lead toward Chaumont. Engineers cleared roads and repaired bridges as they went, often under artillery fire. German intelligence officers, confident that the weather would prevent any major Allied movement, remained unaware of the scale of Patton's redeployment. Reports reaching the 5th Panzer Army headquarters dismissed sightings of American armor as isolated movements. One officer, Oberst Hans von Poschinger, wrote in his diary, "They cannot move in this weather. Our roads are impassable." But Patton's army did move, day and night, in a relentless rhythm that defied both terrain and temperature. Back inside Bastogne, communication with the outside world was fragile. Radio operators of the 326th Airborne Signal Company fought static and low batteries to transmit situation reports to higher command. Each coded message carried the same grim details: dwindling ammunition, rising casualties, and worsening frostbite among the men. The last air resupply had been days earlier. The paratroopers were now subsisting on half rations. Still, McAuliffe's headquarters remained calm. Artillery fire from the 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion continued to answer every German attack. The town's defenders refused to yield an inch. By the evening of December 22nd, the first elements of Patton's advance guard encountered German resistance near the villages of Chaumont and Neufchâteau. The 37th Tank Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton W. Abrams, led the assault. Abrams was known for his aggressive tactics and fearless leadership. His Shermans clashed with elements of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, the same formation to which Oberleutnant Karl Hoffmann belonged. Snow muffled the thunder of battle, but flashes of gunfire illuminated the forests. German anti-tank guns knocked out several Shermans, yet Abrams' men pressed forward, using coordinated artillery and machine gun fire to suppress enemy positions. Reports from German frontline units began to reveal confusion. Patrols spoke of unexpected armored columns approaching from the south. Supply units, already strained by lack of fuel, were caught in ambushes along forest roads. At 5th Panzer Army headquarters, General Manteuffel received conflicting information. American reinforcements were moving, but their numbers seemed impossible. He dismissed the early reports as exaggerations, assuming any counterattack would take days to organize. The weather turned worse overnight. Visibility dropped to less than 50 meters. Convoys crawled forward, headlights covered with blackout hoods. Mechanics worked without rest, thawing frozen engines and repairing broken tracks. Soldiers slept in their vehicles, wrapped in blankets stiff with ice. Despite it all, morale remained high. Patton's promise, "We'll reach Bastogne in 2 days," had become a battle cry. On December 23rd, the first break in the weather occurred. The skies cleared briefly, allowing Allied aircraft to take off for the first time in a week. C-47 transports from Nyack's Troop Carrier Command roared toward Bastogne, dropping over 250 tons of ammunition, food, and medical supplies by parachute. The sight of parachutes descending through the cold blue sky electrified the defenders. Men cheered from the foxholes as the long-awaited supplies drifted down. It was the lifeline they needed to survive until Patton's tanks arrived. At the same time, the Third Army's advance intensified. The 4th Armored Division smashed through German roadblocks at Martelange, capturing prisoners and clearing the route toward Bastogne. Combat engineers struggled to repair bridges destroyed by German retreating units using prefabricated Bailey spans under sniper fire. Every mile gained came at a cost. German artillery harassed the columns, and mines littered the roads. Yet the Americans pressed on, averaging nearly 25 miles of movement per day despite the weather. Inside Bastogne, German attacks grew desperate. The 15th Panzer Grenadier Regiment launched a heavy assault against the southern perimeter near Marvy, supported by tanks and self-propelled guns. American paratroopers of the 327th Glider Infantry fought them off in close-quarter combat, firing bazookas from windows and cellars. The frozen ground made digging impossible, forcing the defenders to fight above ground in deadly exposure. The snow turned red, one survivor recalled, yet, for every assault, the line held. By December 24th, fragments of German intercepts began to confirm what their commanders had refused to believe. Patton's Third Army was moving north in strength. A captured radio message referred to multiple American armored columns pushing through Luxembourg. General Manteuffel ordered reinforcements to shift south, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted. The once confident encirclement was now a race against time. As Christmas Eve approached, Patton's forces were within striking distance of Bastogne. The first major German positions guarding the approach at Bigonville and Bernin had fallen. Exhausted American tank crews pushed forward through the night, their engines roaring against the cold silence of the Ardennes. Every mile brought them closer to the besieged paratroopers who still clung to the town's ruins. For Oberleutnant Hoffmann and his comrades on the German side, the mood had changed. What had seemed certain now felt uncertain, even ominous. Reports spoke of enemy armor closing fast from the south. "It cannot be," one officer whispered, as the distant sound of engines reached their lines. But it was real. The unstoppable force was approaching, and within 48 hours, it would break through. The turning point of the Battle of the Bulge had begun, not with surrender, but with a single word shouted into the freezing wind: nuts. By December 23, 1944, the Battle of the Bulge had reached its critical phase. The German encirclement of Bastogne was complete, but their confidence was beginning to erode. In the icy woods south of the town, new sounds echoed through the valleys. Deep, rhythmic thunder that did not belong to artillery. It was the rumble of Patton's Third Army advancing with mechanical precision through snow-choked roads. What had seemed impossible 2 days earlier was now happening. An entire American army was driving north in a full-scale relief operation across nearly 50 miles of frozen terrain. Patton's 4th Armored Division led the advance. Commanded by Major General Hugh Gaffey, it was the spearhead of the relief effort, supported by the 26th Infantry and 80th Infantry Divisions. Within the 4th, the 37th Tank Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Creighton W. Abrams became the tip of the spear. Abrams was known for aggressive tactics. His doctrine was simple: speed, coordination, and shock. Despite blizzards, iced roads, and German resistance, his columns moved relentlessly forward, clearing one village after another. The first major clashes occurred at Chaumont on December 23rd. German forces of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, supported by elements of the Führer-Begleit Brigade, fought tenaciously, using anti-tank guns and concealed positions among the trees. American artillery, 105mm and 150mm howitzers, positioned south of Neufchâteau, pounded the enemy lines to clear the way. The advance was slow, measured in yards rather than miles, yet the momentum was irreversible. Behind Abrams' tanks, supply convoys stretched for miles, bringing fuel, food, and ammunition through roads that had been cleared only hours earlier by combat engineers. For the first time in a week, the skies cleared completely on December 23rd. Allied air superiority re-emerged. C-47 transport aircraft of IX Troop Carrier Command conducted massive airdrops over Bastogne, delivering more than 350 tons of supplies in a single day. The paratroopers on the ground watched as parachutes blossomed against the blue sky. Ammunition crates, medical kits, and rations drifting down like salvation. Simultaneously, P-47 Thunderbolts of the 9th Air Force strafed German convoys and artillery positions, crippling their ability to reinforce the siege. German officers realized the weather that had favored them was now turning against them. As the Third Army pressed north, German resistance stiffened. Near Martelange, the 4th Armored Division's lead elements ran into an ambush by the 5th Fallschirmjäger Division. The Germans fought from elevated forest positions, using Panzerfausts and machine guns to slow the column. Several American tanks were lost, and the narrow bridge over the Schur River was demolished. Engineers from the 22nd Armored Engineer Battalion worked under fire to construct a temporary bridge from steel girders and wood planks. Within 6 hours, the crossing was complete. The column resumed its advance, demonstrating the logistical agility that defined Patton's army. Between December 24th and 25, the battle reached a fever pitch. The 4th Armored Division's Combat Command B fought its way through Tintange and Warnac, while Combat Command Reserve advanced along the N4 highway toward the southern outskirts of Bastogne. Snowstorms returned, blanketing the battlefield and obscuring visibility. Tanks advanced by compass bearings, guided by infantry scouts on foot. Despite the conditions, the Americans moved at an average speed of 20 to 25 miles per day, an extraordinary pace given the terrain and weather. Casualties mounted on both sides. By Christmas morning, the 4th Armored Division had lost approximately 600 men and 50 vehicles. German losses were higher, especially among infantry units lacking winter gear and mechanized support. Prisoners captured by the Americans spoke openly of confusion and exhaustion. "We thought you were still in Lorraine," one soldier told his captors. "How did you get here so fast?" That disbelief was mirrored at German headquarters, where staff officers struggled to reconcile field reports with their assumptions. The image of a static, sluggish Allied force had vanished. While Patton's divisions battled northward, Bastogne itself became a fortress of endurance. German artillery continued to shell the town incessantly. The 101st Airborne's lines wavered but held. The resupply from the air and the faint hope of relief kept morale intact. Brigadier General McAuliffe ordered his men to hold fast until the tanks arrive. Patrols reported hearing gunfire in the distance, a sign that friendly forces were closing in. On December 25th, the Germans launched one last effort to crush the defenders before Patton could arrive. The 15th Panzer Grenadier Regiment attacked the Marvy sector, with tank support from the 10th Panzer Division. The battle raged for hours in blinding snow. American paratroopers of the 327th Glider Infantry repelled the assault with bazookas, grenades, and point-blank rifle fire. The bodies of German infantrymen lay frozen in the open field as night fell. By then, it was clear that the encirclement could not hold much longer. Farther south, Patton's columns converged on the village of Assenois, the final barrier between the Third Army and Bastogne. The approach road was heavily mined and defended by elements of the 901st Panzer Grenadier Regiment. On the morning of December 26th, Abrams's 37th Tank Battalion began its final push. Artillery fire from both sides thundered through the forest. Shermans moved in line formation, machine guns blazing. Infantry followed close behind, clearing trenches and buildings. By late afternoon, the lead tank, commanded by Sergeant Osborne, broke through the German defenses and entered Bastogne's perimeter. The long-awaited link-up had been achieved. The relief of Bastogne came almost exactly 48 hours after Patton's offensive had begun. In the snow-covered streets, paratroopers and tankers embraced amid the wreckage. For the first time in days, food and medical supplies flowed freely. Patton's promise had been fulfilled. What analysts had deemed impossible, a full-scale pivot and advance through winter terrain, was now accomplished fact. At German headquarters, disbelief gave way to resignation. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights confirmed massive American troop movements stretching from Arlon to Bastogne. Reports estimated over 100,000 U.S. soldiers in motion, supported by thousands of vehicles. General Manteuffel later described the moment bluntly, "We realized then that our offensive was finished." The encirclement had failed, and with it, the last German hope for victory in the West. The weather cleared again on December 27th, sealing Germany's fate. Allied air power dominated the skies, striking fuel convoys and retreating columns. Within days, German units began withdrawing toward the east, abandoning wrecked vehicles and dead comrades in the snow. What had begun as Hitler's final gamble now lay shattered among the frozen pines of the Ardennes. For Oberleutnant Karl Hoffmann and the men of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, the laughter of December 21st had long since vanished. In its place remained only exhaustion and disbelief. As they trudged back through the forest, the distant drone of Allied aircraft overhead marked the end of their offensive. The siege of Bastogne was broken, but more than a town had been saved. The relief demonstrated in undeniable terms the power of mobility, logistics, and leadership, the very elements that defined modern warfare. The proof of that mastery, both logistical and strategic, would soon become overwhelming. The relief of Bastogne was more than a tactical success. It was a full-scale logistical and operational miracle. Within 48 hours, General George S. Patton's Third Army had executed one of the most extraordinary maneuvers in modern warfare, a 90-degree pivot under combat conditions, in deep winter across enemy territory. It was an operation that transformed the Battle of the Bulge from a German offensive into an Allied counteroffensive. For the Wehrmacht, the implications were devastating. For the Allies, it became proof that industrial might, mobility, and command agility could overcome even the harshest conditions of war. The scale of Patton's movement defied precedent. Between December 19 and 26, 1944, approximately 133,000 soldiers, 11,000 trucks, and 400 tanks redeployed northward over snow-clogged roads. These columns stretched for nearly 70 miles, moving with clockwork precision. Fuel consumption was immense, more than 400,000 gallons per day, but the Red Ball Express delivered every drop. Each division averaged 25 miles of progress per day, a feat military analysts had considered unattainable in such weather. Mechanics, engineers, and quartermasters worked continuously, ensuring every tank and truck remained operational. This mobility shattered German expectations and crippled their ability to respond. By December 26th, the link-up at Bastogne signaled the turning of the tide. The German 5th Panzer Army's drive toward the Meuse had stalled, and the 2nd Panzer Division's spearheads were retreating under Allied air attacks. The weather, once the Germans' ally, had become their enemy. As skies cleared, Allied aircraft swarmed over the battlefield. The 9th and 12th Tactical Air Forces destroyed hundreds of German vehicles, fuel depots, and artillery positions. The Luftwaffe, reduced to a shadow of its former power, could offer no meaningful response. The air resupply operations that had sustained Bastogne now expanded to strike deep into the German rear. Inside Staff headquarters, Eisenhower's staff marveled at the precision of Patton's operation. Reports from the Third Army's headquarters described a constant stream of radio traffic, coordinating thousands of movements across multiple corps. The 4th Armored Division's rapid advance was supported by synchronized artillery barrages and prearranged air cover. The system functioned like a living organism, adjusting dynamically to terrain, weather, and enemy contact. The key lay in planning and flexibility, qualities that German command structures, rigid and centralized, lacked entirely. At the front, Patton's troops consolidated their hold around Bastogne, expanding the corridor to ensure steady resupply. Engineers widened roads and built new bridges across the icy Aure and Wilts rivers. Fuel convoys moved unopposed through areas that had been German-held days earlier. Patton issued a succinct message to Eisenhower: "Bastogne has been relieved." It was both a declaration of success and a signal that the German offensive was finished. The German High Command recognized the scale of the failure almost immediately. General Hasso von Manteuffel later admitted in his post-war debriefing, "The speed with which the Americans reacted was astonishing. Their capacity for movement and supply far exceeded anything we could achieve." Heinz Guderian, chief of the General Staff, echoed that sentiment. "We could no longer match their mechanization. Each American division had more transport vehicles than an entire German corps." These admissions underscored the growing imbalance between the two sides. By late December, Allied air superiority was absolute. On December 24th alone, over 2,000 sorties were flown in support of ground operations. The Luftwaffe lost nearly 100 aircraft attempting to disrupt them. The skies above the Ardennes were filled with contrails and the deep roar of engines, symbols of the technological dominance that Germany could no longer challenge. Every attempt to resupply or reinforce German units met destruction from above. Meanwhile, Patton's logistical infrastructure continued to demonstrate unmatched efficiency. In just 1 week, his army delivered over 26,000 tons of supplies, repaired hundreds of vehicles, and maintained near-perfect communication lines across a constantly shifting front. Fuel trucks operated in convoys stretching for miles, guarded by military police and supported by mobile workshops. Even in the worst weather, the Third Army sustained an operational tempo that stunned observers. British General Brian Horrocks later remarked, "It was not only a masterpiece of maneuver but of logistics. Patton made an army move like a single armored division." German units around Bastogne began to collapse. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division, decimated and demoralized, fell back toward Wilts. The elite Panzer Lehr Division, once one of Germany's most formidable formations, was reduced to a fraction of its strength. Less than 20 serviceable tanks remained from an original complement of 120. Fuel shortages immobilized many vehicles, forcing crews to abandon them in the snow. By early January 1945, captured German maps revealed handwritten notes pleading for gasoline and ammunition. "Without fuel, we are finished," one officer scrawled. Production figures told the deeper story. In 1944, the United States produced approximately 29,000 tanks, 17,000 aircraft monthly, and over 700,000 trucks, more than all Axis powers combined. Germany, by contrast, produced 19,000 tanks that year, but only a fraction could reach the front due to Allied bombing and transport shortages. The American industrial machine, protected by distance and fueled by abundant resources, ensured that operations like Patton's were not only possible, but sustainable. Each logistical success on the battlefield was the echo of an assembly line operating thousands of miles away. The relief of Bastogne demonstrated the fusion of industrial strength with tactical genius. Patton's leadership style, bold, precise, and relentless, enabled his army to exploit every advantage. His corps commanders executed orders with initiative, adapting plans on the move. The coordination between ground and air forces reached unprecedented levels of efficiency. By December 29th, the German salient in the Ardennes had lost momentum entirely. Allied forces began counterattacking along the northern and southern flanks, squeezing the Bulge back toward the Siegfried Line. As the Germans withdrew, evidence of their collapse filled the roads. Abandoned tanks, frozen horses, shattered artillery, and lines of prisoners trudging eastward. Manteuffel later described the aftermath succinctly. "The offensive died where it began, in the wee snow." The Wehrmacht's last hope for strategic initiative in the West had been extinguished by the combined weight of Allied coordination and production when Patton's staff compiled after-action reports. The statistics astonished even them. In less than 2 weeks, the Third Army had advanced over 70 miles in winter conditions, liberated more than 30 towns, captured 16,000 prisoners, and destroyed or captured over 300 enemy tanks and vehicles. The operation validated Patton's doctrine that speed and aggression, when sustained by logistics, were the decisive factors in modern war. The morale impact was profound. To the soldiers of the 101st Airborne, Patton's arrival symbolized more than relief. It was proof that no force, however desperate, would be abandoned. To the Germans, it was a signal that the tide of war had irrevocably turned. After Bastogne, Manteuffel later reflected, "We knew the end was only a matter of time." By the first week of January 1945, the Ardennes offensive was collapsing. Allied forces regained all lost ground, and German casualties exceeded 100,000 men. Thousands of vehicles lay wrecked along the frozen roads. Hitler's last gamble had failed utterly. What had begun as an attempt to divide the Allies had instead unified them in triumph. The relief of Bastogne became the definitive proof of American operational superiority. It revealed the unbreakable link between strategy, logistics, and morale, a trinity that Germany could no longer contest. For historians, it stands as the moment when industrial warfare reached its most effective expression. For those who fought in the snow and ice, it was the moment when hope returned to the Ardennes. Patton's promise had been kept. Bastogne was free, and the war in the West was now a countdown to Germany's defeat. The relief of Bastogne marked more than the end of a siege. It symbolized the collapse of Germany's final offensive power. When the Battle of the Bulge concluded in late January 1945, the strategic balance of the war in Europe had shifted irrevocably. The Wehrmacht, drained of manpower, fuel, and morale, would never again mount a large-scale attack in the West. What had begun on December 16th as Hitler's last gamble ended in a costly defeat, one that consumed Germany's final reserves and exposed the overwhelming superiority of Allied logistics and command flexibility. Casualty. Figures reveal the scale of the struggle. The Battle of the Bulge cost the Allies approximately 89,500 men, 19,000 killed, 47,500 wounded, and 23,000 missing or captured. German losses were even greater, estimated between 80,000 and 100,000 killed, wounded, or captured. Thousands of vehicles and tanks lay frozen across the Ardennes countryside, testament to the brutal cost of winter warfare. The Luftwaffe lost nearly 1,600 aircraft during December and January, eroding what little remained of its operational strength. By contrast, the Allies replaced their losses in weeks, while the Germans could not replace theirs at all. For Germany, the consequences were catastrophic. The offensive had consumed nearly all remaining fuel reserves. Some estimates suggest as much as two-thirds of the Reich's total supply. Once the offensive failed, the Western Front became indefensible. Army Group B withdrew to the Siegfried Line, and by February, Allied forces had crossed the Rhine at multiple points. The Eastern Front collapsed soon after as the Soviet Red Army surged into East Prussia and Silesia. The dream of forcing a political stalemate was dead. The Ardennes gamble had not delayed defeat, it had accelerated it. For the United States, Bastogne became a symbol of resilience and unity under fire. The 101st Airborne stand, combined with Patton's rapid advance, embodied the spirit of the American war effort: adaptability, courage, and technical precision. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, whose one-word reply, "nuts," had rallied his men, became a national hero. When interviewed after the war, he simply said, "We were cold, hungry, and tired, but we had faith in each other and in the men coming to get us." That faith had been justified by Patton's relentless drive. German officers, in their post-war analyses, often expressed admiration for the operation that had defeated them. General Hasso von Manteuffel described Patton's relief of Bastogne as a miracle of movement. He admitted that no German army could have replicated such a maneuver under similar conditions. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, who had opposed Hitler's plan from the start, later remarked, "The Americans could move faster than we could think." Even Heinz Guderian, architect of Germany's armored doctrine, conceded in 1946 that Patton's execution of the Bastogne relief represented the culmination of modern mobile warfare, fueled not by ideology, but by supply. The institutional lessons learned from Bastogne shaped U.S. Army doctrine for decades. Patton's emphasis on logistical preparation, contingency planning, and command flexibility became foundational principles of modern maneuver warfare. The integration of air support, mechanized mobility, and rapid communications defined future operations in Korea, Vietnam, and the Persian Gulf. Military academies around the world studied the Third Army's Ardennes campaign as a case study in operational adaptability, the art of transforming a defensive crisis into an offensive victory. Patton himself viewed Bastogne not merely as a victory, but as a validation of his lifelong belief in movement and willpower. "Wars are won by speed, not hesitation," he wrote in his diary days after the battle. His success at Bastogne silenced critics who had accused him of recklessness. Even his rivals acknowledged that only Patton's foresight and discipline had made the relief possible. His insistence on readiness, the 3 contingency plans ordered days before the German attack, proved decisive. What others called luck was, in truth, preparation meeting opportunity. In the broader historical sense, Bastogne became a symbol of Allied cooperation. Eisenhower's strategic leadership, Montgomery's coordination in the north, and Patton's audacity in the south combined to crush the German offensive. The victory reaffirmed the strength of Allied unity at a time when Hitler had sought to divide them. It also demonstrated the maturation of the American Army, a force that had entered the war inexperienced in 1942 and, by 1944, had become the most mechanized and adaptable military in the world. Today, the town of Bastogne stands as a living memorial to that winter ordeal. Monuments, museums, and preserved battlefields mark the positions where paratroopers, tankers, and infantry fought and froze in defense of freedom. The Mardasson Memorial, a vast stone star overlooking the town, bears the names of the 76,890 American soldiers who were killed, wounded, or missing during the Ardennes campaign. The narrow roads that once echoed with the rumble of Shermans and half-tracks are now quiet, lined with plaques and flags. Yet the story endures, of endurance against odds, of courage under siege, and of an army that refused to be stopped by weather, distance, or fear. In military annals, Bastogne remains a benchmark for operational agility. Every major modern army studies it to understand the relationship between logistics, timing, and morale. It showed that warfare was no longer a contest of sheer numbers or firepower, but of movement and coordination. In the Ardennes, Patton proved that mobility could achieve what brute force could not: the ability to dictate the tempo of war. For the German veterans who survived, Bastogne became a bitter memory, the moment when their last offensive strength met the immovable determination of a new kind of army. For the Americans who fought there, it became a legend, passed down through generations of soldiers as proof that discipline and daring could coexist. Oberleutnant Karl Hoffmann, the young officer who had once watched Bastogne from the hills with amused confidence, survived the war and returned to civilian life in Munich. In a post-war interview, he reflected on that winter. "We laughed at them then, cold, surrounded, and hungry. But when their tanks came through the snow, I understood that we had lost more than a battle. We had lost the war." His words captured the transformation that had unfolded in the Ardennes, from arrogance to awe, from siege to salvation. The story of Bastogne endures not just as a tale of victory, but as a study in the power of preparation, leadership, and will. From the laughter of German officers to the roar of Patton's tanks, it remains a defining testament to how resolve and mobility turned the tide of a world at war.